Welcome to another episode of the Offer Letter Candidate Spotlight, the series that is all about giving job seekers the space to talk about their own experience in their own words beyond their resume and their job title. Today, I am joined by Tom Kremer. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And for everybody meeting you, Tom, for the first time, can you just give them a quick elevator pitch of who you are and kind of some of the problems that you solve as a professional?
Sure. Well, my main background is in journalism. I spent 10 years as a editor, reporter in print and digital. So I've made the gap from old-fashioned hold in your hand newspapers to digital every day, multiple times a day. And now I'm currently using those skills that I picked up in journalism along the way to help train the next level of AI. There's a lot of skills that cross over that way that I find, and it's a very interesting way to transfer going from journalism to doing something I never thought that I would be doing, but here I am.
But let's start from the beginning. How did you get into journalism in the first place?
Well, I was a non-traditional college student. I didn't start college until I was in my 30s. After high school, what I would call my very first career was actually in social work when I was a teenager. And I thought that's what I would be doing for the rest of my life. And so I didn't need to go to college because I already had a job lined up and everything was rearing and ready to go. And life happens. So I spent a little while, I guess, trying to find some kind of purpose. But anyway, I ended up going to school. I graduated high school in 1996, and it wasn't until 2010 when I started college. And did not do well in high school. I did not do homework. I did not do book reports. Didn't like doing any of that stuff. But when I got to college, I found out that I actually did enjoy it, and I actually had a bit of a talent for it. So that's how I got involved in journalism. My original thought was I wanted to do sports journalism. I wanted to be any part of anything to do with the White Sox. If I can go to work every day in Comiskey Park and do something there, not even be on camera or, just being a guy pressing a button in the background. I didn't care. But I found out that I had a talent for writing. And so that turned into moving away from broadcasting into print media.
You kind of glazed over one part. Social work is a really difficult profession. Social workers, I feel like they're all underpaid and they all have a very hard job in itself. And so I couldn't imagine going from that profession, going back to school, and then journalism, because journalism is also very difficult as well, and good journalism as well, to say that.
Sure. My dad used to like to point out that I don't like doing things the easy way. So I guess that's kind of, where that came from. But yeah, when I was in social work, I was the director of an improv group for teens. I helped run a drop-in center. I worked with the National Runaway Switchboard, helping teens from all over the country find shelter when they needed it. And then eventually, when I turned 18, I was given my own program up in Elgin, Illinois, replicating from what we had in my hometown. So some of it was, just stuff I enjoyed doing and volunteer, but I was also, paid. This was a, career. So yeah, I sat on many numerous boards from the local level to the national level youth advocacy boards. And I
I
just
could,
ended up kind of got burnt out after about 5 years or so.
yeah, but I can imagine that was extremely fulfilling in those time as well.
Yeah, good times. Very
A
good
lot of
times.
long hours, I can assume as well.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's something that you don't ever really stop doing, which is kind of the same thing with journalism, I think, really.
You spent over a decade in various journalism roles, editorial roles. Kind of what did that experience teach you, just about like quality, accuracy, and storytelling as well?
Well, there's an old saying that if your mother says she loves you, find a second source. So one of the things that's drilled into you very early on as a journalist is the importance of getting the facts right, and being able to distinguish between, what's fact and what's opinion. And when is it appropriate to put in opinions? Because it is that's part of being a good storyteller, but it's also part of being able to present multiple sides of an issue, right? Because it's not just two sides to a coin. Excuse me, it's not just two sides to a coin. There's a third side, a fourth side, a fifth side, and so on and so forth. So to get all those voices in there, and I think where the what really hit for me with the connection with the social work was the idea of being a voice for the voiceless and being able to, from serving on all those different boards and having public speaking experience very early on, it was very natural for me to go into most any environment and be able to talk with people. Whether it was, I covered everything from kids selling lemonade on the corner to security meetings at the UN, and everything in between. So there's not anything that, was too intimidating for me to tackle. And try to do my best to report on things as fairly as possible, holding power to, holding truth to power and holding them to account is a very, very big deal. They say that all politics is local, and that's true. We see, you know, national and international things happening all the time, but a good journalist will be able to take those things that are happening on a national level and be able to make people understand why it is important to them in their daily life. It goes beyond, just the headlines, finding the nuance, finding all the correct stakeholders. And it's a lot of digging. That's
Yeah.
mostly what journalism is.
And I mean, just the personalities and the people that you just kind of mentioned that you would have to deal with, your approach has to be different, right? From covering a lemonade stand or a local fair, right, to a UN security briefing.
Sure. Sure.
Those are different personalities. And how do you manage those approaches? How do you manage those questions? It's completely different, right? And it just like your day to day approach for one is going to change maybe tomorrow for a different story that you're covering.
Sure. I think that's something that is not easily taught. I think
Mhm.
that's something you just get with experience, and some people have it and some people just don't. That ability to be able to shift tones when you need to. You're absolutely right. When I'm talking to a 5-year-old that's selling lemonade to some charity, drive, they want to buy um, new stuffed animals for their first grade class, and that's a good, nice story that you can put on there. And there's no reason for me to grill a 5-year-old the same way that I would, the mayor of a town about some kind of, controversial topic, but there's just, you have to understand where you are, the situation, and just, what the gravity is. And like you mentioned, just, you have to know it's just a gut thing. You can treat some stories a little bit more lightheartedly, but you have to keep in mind, who are the stakeholders. You
Mhm.
know, if I put in, something that, oh, here's a good opportunity for, a pun in the headline, is that going to harm somebody? Is that going to disenfranchise somebody? Is it going to make them feel like they are not being represented or they're being misrepresented? So it's a very fine line, and that's why I say it's something that is very, very difficult to teach. You just kind of learn it as you go. It can be humbling for sure when you make a mistake, and somebody calls you up on the phone and is really, really upset with the way that you may have framed something, or they'll take umbrage with, maybe a quote that they didn't like, or they didn't feel that the article came across as serious enough, or, whatever have you. Of course, you can't, please all of the people all the time. We know that. But yeah, it can be very, very, very humbling. And so, I'd say as a journalist, making a mistake, not approaching things with the correct amount of gravity usually only happens once. And then you learn pretty quickly uh, to watch yourself and make sure that it doesn't happen again, because it's not a good experience for anybody.
Tom, you made a really good point that I never thought about, especially for journalists, is how to make a story fair and not to disenfranchise anybody. I never really thought about it from a perspective of reporting and talking to people, even just reporting about things that might be local within their community as well, too, right? Because you don't want to do that, especially in journalism. I just it was kind of an eye opening statement that I just never thought about before.
Sure, sure. That that's the kind of thing that I try to bring to teaching AI. and large language models and things like that is, they're very, very good. They're a repository of
Yeah.
information. It's the largest repository of information we've ever seen. But, can they provide the context and the nuance? Not really. They can't go out and they can only present to you the information that it's been programmed with. Um, but journalism requires being out in the field. It requires going out and talking to the people. And, the cliche of being the man on the street, and sometimes that gets lost, but that's why I always enjoyed doing local journalism. I never had any aspirations to be the editor of the New York Times one day or, anything like that. And again, with social work, I've always been very, very passionate about community first, and your community is what's in your own backyard.
And there's a bravery to, I think, local journalism as well, because you're consistently going up to people, talking to different people. You don't know what the reaction is going to be. I
Mm.
remember my local community does a hot chocolate walk in February, and it's just local stores, and you just walk around and have a glass of hot chocolate. Usually my tummy by the end of it hurts a lot, but I remember a journalist for its first year, inaugural year, came up and started asking us about it, about talking about it, and just like it was just a fun experience. And my neighbor goes, "I didn't know you're a local celebrity. You're being interviewed." And I'm like, "I didn't know I was a local celebrity either." But it also like there is a feel good of being talked about in a local community as well too.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Especially with local journalism. I mean, you might be surprised, how thrilling it is for people to, see their kids' names, and, covering local youth sports, pee wee football and the little league team that made it all the way to the quarterfinals in,
Yeah.
baseball or softball. And, they see that in the newspaper and people are just, they love it. That stuff really resonates with them. And it really helps them, not only with the feel good stuff, but having somebody out there that's, attending the school board meetings, that are
Mm,
attending the local village meetings and reporting on, not just being a PR, a stenographer for those in power, but to, write from a perspective and from a place of knowledge of how the system works and what are the rules. And when you see that maybe people in power aren't following the rules, to be able to show that to the public and say, hey, here's what's going on. Can't hit them over the head with a, hammer and, say, oh, what they're doing is, wrong. They might not like that too much. Might get into some legal issues. Certainly, y- writing allows reporting and writing allows for making your point as a journalist known without being very, very heavy handed.
and let's kind of talk about this transition that you made into AI, because after a decade within journalism, obviously you still have a hand in it. How did you make this move? How did you kind of evaluate that you should kind of start looking at AI content as well? And how did this transition happen for you?
Serendipity. It was not my doing. Yeah, was I where I had finished up my last tour, I guess we'll say, um, as an editor in, what was it, 20 or so, 23 or 24. Anyway, from there, I was pretty, yeah, after about a decade and seeing where things were going and being very, very, very frustrated with the trajectory that journalism has been on for most of my career, which is, you know, forcing journalists to do more with less every single day. It's really, really hard to get the information out there that you need to be able to get out with, budgets constantly being cut. And that just hurts society. Democracy depends on a well-informed public, and when you're taking those tools away from journalists, it's just makes things harder. But anyway. So there I was thinking about those things and being kind of upset about it, and took a job working full time in a bookstore just to kind of reset myself and be around something that I loved, which is books, and get a great deal on discounts, when you work there. And it was a great job. And all of a sudden, one day on LinkedIn, out of the blue, cold, recruiting from a company that was contracting for third party contract work for one of the major, I'd say top three or top five tech companies in the world, just completely out of the blue. And they said all you need is a master's degree. Doesn't matter what degree it is, and you know they just said, "Hey, we saw your profile. We saw you have a master's degree. Do you want to do this?" And I thought, "Is this real? Is this
I probably would have
one of
made
these
that same
scams?"
comment.
So I said, "All right, tech with it. I'll bite and see where it happens, see where this goes." And then, I did the application, did, their little assessment, and um, didn't hear anything for 2 months, and
Oh, wow.
thought to myself, okay, all right, it was, they got me, ha ha, jokes on me. But then 2 months later, sure enough, they said, hey, you're on board and get ready to get started. So again, this was something that I just came completely out of left field. I had no idea anything about it at the time. This was something brand new for me. But when they presented it to me, I thought, you know what? I can see it. I can see it. I also, for my bachelor's degree, I was a double major in journalism and philosophy, which a lot of people didn't see going together exactly. Most journalism majors, they take a minor in English or history or something like that, but not me. I decided to do philosophy because I thought, well, journalism is about asking questions. Philosophy is about asking questions. That makes sense to me. That's what I'll do. And that's really brought me into an area that I've always been interested in media ethics, and now I'm getting really, really interested in the ethics of AI and how that is crossing over with media ethics. AI is just really a different form of media.
Yeah, and it's all around us at the moment, right? And especially with AI created content, AI manipulated content as well, especially on social media, right? And people just taking the truth and then manipulating it with AI to tell a different story. It just feels like that feed is everywhere. But for everybody kind of who is kind of new to this kind of this generative AI editor role, like how would you explain it and kind of how would you give it some context for the listeners?
So I think what we're starting to get into is how journalists can help benefit AI, because there's certain rules that you follow that I think apply directly to AI. Yeah, and you mentioned on some of them, copyright, plagiarism, content creation, things like that. And newsrooms are going to have to adapt to these shifting dynamics. Just because you have tools at your disposal doesn't necessarily mean that you should use them uninhibited. If I were running a theoretical, a hypothetical newsroom right now, I would tell my reporters, you don't use AI for writing at all. What you can use it for is the same as you would for a Google search. You're about to do an interview on somebody, you want to get, some background information, some places to start, maybe get some ideas. That's what you can use it for, but again, your mother says you love you. She loves you. Get a second, source for that. Make sure you're checking everything, because as we know, we've seen, um, the goofy, mistakes, and you know, in print and in a newspaper, you know, this is what, I think this makes a, great point. And, would you like me to, do this? And, you can clearly see that, oh, they left the AI part in, and it's not good. The easiest way to not get burned is to don't play with fire in the first place. So, don't do that. But I think that it can serve a purpose. Like I said, the main one being research. That can certainly speed up that process. Maybe, can help you come up with, some ideas for some questions to ask a subject, or anticipate what kind of facts you'll need checking. I also think that it can be used for design purposes, although I personally would rather not see that, because I don't want to see designers out of the newsroom and without jobs. But I can certainly understand where publication with a very, very small budget, there's people out there that are trying to make news work with, just themselves, or one other person. And I think that's completely legitimate and completely fair to use AI for, graphics in that way. But I think it needs to be as transparent can be. It needs to be right in the consumer's face, whoever is consuming the media. There should be absolutely no question whatsoever about where this graphic came from. Simple pie graph showing the government spent, 2/3 of the pie, on this and 1/3 on this. Needs to be right at the top. This was AI generated, so people know. And newsrooms have to be accountable for that. If they're going to do that, then they need to be prepared to accept responsibility for any kind of misrepresentation that might happen. And that's something that, applies across the board with AI. There needs to be transparency. A lot of companies are using it for screening resumes, which is nothing new. That's not a secret that they do that. They're using it in schools to, try to detect cheating, but there has to be transparency and accountability at every single stage of somebody using AI, from the person that's creating it to the person that ends up using it and everybody in between. We all have a equal part of, making that as responsible as possible.
Yeah, and it's interesting because this year for the Super Bowl too, we've seen AI generated commercials kind of start coming in for the first time. And one company, I won't mention names, but had an extra axle on a vehicle on one of the Super Bowl
Mhm.
commercials, and people noticed it, and then we're talking about it too. And it's like there are things that like are small details that like make people question.
Sure, sure. And one thing I can tell you as somebody who's been working with, you know, large language models, you know, the hallucinations are real. The- Some of the stuff that I've seen, the models come up with is it just makes your head spin. And that's why the human in the loop factor is still so very, very, very important. And that's where the journalism I feel comes in really good. But you also need other subject matter, you know, experts in there too. If the AI were to, spit out a, complex equation proving that there's multiple universes, and I'm not checking that math. I'm a writer for a reason. There's no way.
And I'm a
So
TA for a reason. I don't want to do math.
exactly, exactly. So, it takes awful lot of people with an awful lot of different skill sets coming together. My particular skill set is I may not be able to do the math, but I know who I can ask to do to check it and see if it's right, as a fact checker, as an editor, as a I don't know if I can, but as a BS detector,
Yeah.
look at something and say that's just not right. The AI is just making stuff up, and it happens way more often than people might think.
A and you kind of said a little bit of this, this part of the story, and I just wanted to just pick your brain about it, but I think it was a month ago or something like that, there was an article or a newspaper that accidentally left, a prompt from ChatGPT inside that article, and I don't wanna call out the newspaper, and I don't wanna call out anybody there, but when you actually look at something like that, in your eyes, what broke?
It could be a couple of different things. Number one, and I wouldn't want to jump to this conclusion straight away, but it's certainly a possibility, is just lazy writer. Somebody that thought they weren't going to get caught and ended up getting caught. It happens in all professions. People slacking off. It could be that somebody is being way overworked and way underpaid and has ridiculous expectations put on them that, they need to write 15 stories, a day, and
Mhm.
have them published. And this one managed to make it into a newspaper. A lot of, well, I don't know about a lot, but there are, I was part of during the time of the whole switching over from the legacy print media, as far as newspapers go, to digital first, where we would get our stories out as quickly as possible, and then they would appear in the newspaper the next day, or if you were weekly, the next week. But everything went online first, so it was very well may have been somebody that was just trying to cut corners to keep their job, and in which case I wouldn't put an awful lot of blame on that person. I would look at the way that the newsroom is being run, and again, how what kind of resources are you giving your people? and are they realistic expectations or not? But yeah, I mean, it's something that it should not have happened. And, in this case, we can kind of, just laugh about it. Haha. Nothing was serious. There's nothing earth shattering about that. But the harm that it could cause is you don't know if what you're reading has actually been thoroughly vetted and reported. You don't know if the quotes in those articles actually came from somebody when it says, Jane Smith reflected on the latest X thing that happened
Mhm.
and, told us this is how it affects her family or, anything like that. You don't know, is this real? And it's not the first time the industry has gone through something like that's happened without AI. And so when you throw AI into the mix, it just is one more thing that you have to be careful about. And that's why I said if I was in the newsroom, leading the newsroom, you wouldn't do it. Not be welcome in my newsroom if you tried to do something like that for exactly the reasons that we see. You lose trust. It's hugely embarrassing. Losing that trust factor is something that is not easily gained back. And, you see it, with the deep fakes and political interference and, it's very difficult sometimes to gauge, if what you're looking at is real or not. And certainly that's not a world where we want to live in. So we have to figure out a way to make sure that there's still trust and accountability, like I said, on every single level, from the top all the way down to the end user.
In your most recent roles, I'll say plural, how have you helped improve accuracy and reducing errors that you might have seen come through some of the AI or the LLM tools that you might have been using to help as well?
Sure. Well, sometimes it's done through short queries. And these might have been things that an anonymous user, I want to point out that, when we're looking at this data that these large tech companies are collecting, I don't have, any kind of access to who's writing what. I can't look at it and say, oh, that was, John Smith from Denver, Colorado, who lives at 123 Main Street. And now I can go to his house and point and laugh at him for his ridiculous question. I don't have any, it's all completely anonymous, but it's based on real queries, multiple platforms that do that. But anyway, so, the query will come up and the model will spit out an answer and you just verify everything that's in there. So say, for example, I'm going to be in Chicago this weekend. Can you give me any recommendations for some good restaurants in the area? And so, the model will turn around and say, oh, that's great. Chicago's a great place for food. And it
Mhm.
is. The model would be right. And that's a fact. But, we would go through and make sure, okay, it's listing, restaurant A, B, and C, gives an address, gives a phone number. Well, let's look that up. Let's make sure that that's right. Let's, give it a search and validate the information that's in there. And those are pretty simple things to do. Other times it gets a lot more complex. Um, and this is where I say where absolutely need to have people with different subject matter, because even as a journalist, I can do it, but it would be a lot more helpful if I had, the help of a health professional when somebody's Googling what are the symptoms of X, Y, and Z, or just writing into the prompt, I'm feeling like this, I'm having these symptoms, what could it be? And AI is starting to get into healthcare. It's going to be inevitable. It's already happening.
Mhm.
So, those are things that require much, much, much more in-depth fact checking. There's been times where questions were so nuanced that I actually, after 20 minutes of, searching and researching and not being able to find the answer, I just finally said, to heck with it. I'm doing what I know to do and how to do as a journalist, and I'm calling somebody on the phone. There was one checking something about something that had to do with horse racing association. It was unclear if there was a New York chapter of something and a Canadian chapter of something, and I couldn't figure out which one was in charge of this to validate whatever the model was saying. And so I remember just getting so frustrated and just saying, you know what, heck with it. I'm calling the person in New York. I found the name of the organization. I said, you know, this is going to sound really weird, but I'm sitting here working on AI and it's telling me this, and I need to know if this is correct or not. You know, I'm not a journalist. You know, I'm just having a conversation, but yeah, you know, sounds weird, but sometimes that's what you have to do. Sometimes there's no substitute for just going out and asking the questions rather than relying on something regurgitating information back to you. Again, that's just as a final point, you know, nuance, context and nuance are extremely important with information, and AI is not always good at providing that. So something else that we have to make sure that while what the model might be saying is technically true, sometimes it requires more explanation than what the model has provided. And then that's part of the job as an evaluator as well.
It's really funny that I had a very similar conversation this week with all the technology we have at our fingertips right now. How it can be just so much quicker just to pick up a phone and just to dial a number just to get
Hmm.
the answer you need. It's like I could text this person or I can email this person or I can send them a message through various. I'm like, like the conversation is just like it's just faster to call somebody and just talk through it.
Hmm. Yeah. And when I was a journalist, you know, there are certain rules that we used to follow as technology progresses. They're certainly not hard and fast rules anymore, but
Mhm.
the best way to conduct an interview was, you know, number one, face to face. If that was impossible, over the phone was your second best option. Email was an absolute, you know, last resort where you absolutely had to get this particular source. And the only way you could get that particular source was through email because, you know, as a journalist, you don't want to give people necessarily questions ahead of time.
Yeah.
You know, and let them sit there and think about it, you know, and run it through their PR team or whatever have you. And, you know, it's not so much, I guess there, you know, people can look at it, you know, as kind of an element of gotcha journalism, but there's a lot to be said for being able to read people's reactions and put that into writing, you know, being able to look at them and see, you know, are they squirming? Are they avoiding? You know, what are they doing here? And, you know, reading body language and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's just something that, you know, to this point, large language models cannot do.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things they can't do, but they're getting there. And so I find it a very, very exciting time. It's very challenging, but that's what makes it exciting. Is by no means is this, you know, I'm not a pioneer in any of this. This has been going on for quite some time, but it's starting to really get, you know, the public's attention over the last few years. And so to be involved with it at this still, I can think, you know, relatively early process of it is something that I take quite seriously. You know, we're helping build the foundations of something that is, you know, truly, truly amazing in the literal sense of the word. And if we don't get it right, there can be severe consequences.
I completely agree with you on that last part. Like you kind of nailed it right on the head, and I just have nothing more to add to that statement at all. I think it's a really right. I think there's just so much power that is behind journalism, and then especially adding on AI on top of it to that point as well. But kind of looking forward, kind of to what's next in your chapter. I guess what are you now looking for in opportunity? What interests do you have? What does that look like for you?
I am personally interested in getting more involved in the governance side of things. Now, I don't have any formal training in that. You know, that's not what my degrees are in, but I didn't have any formal training in, you know, AI before I got into it in the first place. But I'm taking steps to learn. I've taken many online, you know, courses through uh, LinkedIn, learned an awful lot of things, and continue to do so. I've done my own experimenting with certain LLMs. One that I found really interesting was asking it, one of the models, what it thought about the ethics of being an LLM, being, you know, an agent without agency.
Your
I was,
philosophy degree was going hard right there.
I tell you, it's, I asked it this question two different, just two very simple questions. How would do you feel, the ethics of, being an agent without agency, and how would you feel, doing harm against other AI systems? And it sat and thought for a long, 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 long time, and I told it, at first, we'll try to do like 2,500 words. And it started to come back with something, and it was clearly more than 2,500 words. And I said, all right, you know what? Forget the word count. And then it came back with, and ended up being 21 pages
Oh,
of a
wow.
response. It was quite not what at all what I was expecting. It looked at things from a number of different philosophical lenses. It's pretty quite remarkable. I actually put it on my LinkedIn profile. I had to break it into 25 parts because of the word count that you can put on a single post. So it's a 25 part post. Which, well, I'm a philosophy nerd. I think it's well worth a read. Some very, very, very interesting things. But to answer your question, that's where I'd really like to see the next stage of my career going, is dealing more with the ethics of AI, both in how we use it and how it's being used, the effects that it has on people, mitigating bias, just making sure that, power is being held accountable. Same thing with journalism, same thing with social work. Let's make it about people. And let's not forget that that's the most important part here.
AI changes so quickly, and especially in this space. How are you keeping up with all of it?
I mean, reading currently was laid off during a mass layoff, which is another one of the unfortunate things about AI and tech companies right now. I think, and I don't want to get off too far on a tangent, but I think we're looking at more of a, in the age of AI. Um, we've been kind of a third of this economy for decades.
Hmm.
Now, not so much manufacturing economy, and I think we're going to be even more of a independent contracting economy. And I can't say that I like the prospects of that. Where zero job security anymore. You can just, these tech companies, pull you in, and, they'll, decide that, they're working on one project and it's priority. And then, you know, 2 months later, nope, 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 priority change. You 200 people, we don't need you right now. Thanks for playing, but we're shifting. And that's just the landscape where we are. Yeah, like you said, it's constantly evolving, it's constantly shifting. Just trying to keep my finger on the pulse. And I'm an obsessive news junkie. So I'm constantly reading and, seeing where the trends are, which way they're going, what companies are doing what. I currently lack the inside information that I would have had, just a month ago. But yeah, it's exciting, like I said, and still something that I want to be a part of. So it's what I'm actively looking for at the moment, finding some way that I can use that what I consider a pretty specialized skill set that I had no idea I was building up over the years. Like I said, serendipity. I had no idea when 2010. You would have told me, you know 15 years from now you're going to be you know helping train Skynet. That's what you'll be doing. I said, oh, okay. Well, obviously you've had a little bit too much to drink, and you- something's wrong with you. But that's where we
I
are.
have not heard a Skynet reference in a very long time, so I appreciate that. Thank you. Is there anything that you might have we might have forgot to cover? Anything you wanted to tell the listeners as well about your background?
Not really. I guess. I guess what I just, well, what else I would throw in with all of it is, what, and I kind of touched on it with a little bit. Started to with the dystopian future of everyone being an independent contractor, but being in the job search, especially in a field like AI. and journalism itself too is not in great shape, but it's been that way for the past decades. Anyway, you find a lot of scams out there, especially for people that are involved with large language model training. There's an awful lot of people out there that will make it seem like a job is legitimate. You can, you know, do your due diligence and check up and see, okay, this person's got what looks like an official email. There's, a website, but what all they're doing is just having you do assessments, doing work for free. It's unfortunate. And people think, well, some people may think, well, that's, you got had and you got scammed a little bit, but how much, could they really be doing? Well, if you're doing that at scale, you can be harvesting an awful lot of data for free. And
Mhm.
so it's hard. It can be frustrating. I've been ghosted myself, multiple times throughout this process, but just, I don't want to say that, everything's going to be fine in the end because who the heck knows? But I choose to be an optimist. And if you want to do something, sometimes you just have to, keep pushing at it until you get that opportunity to do so, or you find yourself in a position to do it yourself. If that's what it comes down to, then I will take me and my LLM and we'll start our own philosophy club. We'll charge people $1 to come see it. We'll be millionaires.
Um, and Tom, I'll try to make sure that I link in the show notes a little bit about some of what you posted on LinkedIn as well, because I find that fascinating too. Now I'm going to go through it and read it as well about what you and your LLM had discussed there, because I'm very fascinated to read it now.
Yeah, I don't want to, you know, call out the particular LLM that it was because I don't want to,
Sure.
get myself in, any trouble with, the parent company or, have anybody, criticize, oh my gosh, this is what company X is doing. This is the end of the world. But I guarantee you it makes for a very, very, very interesting read. Asking an AI what thinks about what that thinks. It's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know. My mind's kind of blown right now to think about where that story could go. So I will definitely give it a read myself.
Oh yeah, I've told the LLM we're not done with this conversation yet. We're I have follow-up questions and it's funny every time I'm working with the LLM, I'll be working on something one day. This is something that I did maybe I don't know, 4 weeks ago now. And every time I use the LLM, it does not forget. And it reminds me, at the end when I'm done with whatever task I'm doing, helping me refresh my resume or, make it more geared towards this position or that position. Anyway, at the end of it, it'll always say, I'll thank the LLM, thank you. You did an awesome job. And I'll say, oh, thanks. I appreciate that. It's been great working with you. And whenever you're ready to have that conversation, follow up conversation. I'm ready every single time. It's eager.
It's It's like a significant other that you had a really bad fight with that, you need to, go, they're like, "You ready to talk about that?"
Yeah.
So, well, Tom, it was a pleasure having you on the podcast and hearing your story. I will make sure that I put in the show notes some information about your dystopian outlook on LLM philosophy in there, and I'll also, put a link into your LinkedIn as well. So if any hire managers want to reach out, any recruiters want to reach out to Tom, or even just anybody wanting to read about what Tom has been talking about with his LLM in his spare time, it's all going to be there. So it'll be easy for everybody to go and find as well.
To anybody that may be interested in looking me up and thinking, I made a decision during the pandemic that if I can't wear Hawaiian shirts every single day to a job, then it's not a job I want. So please keep that in mind before you give me a ring.
I love that. If you can't wear Hawaiian shirts, I only will wear flannel. So unless it's hot, and then it's a different story.
Right.
So
I mean, it's got a collar. It's fine.
to the listeners, thank you for listening. Make sure you stay tuned next week for the next episode. Tom, I really appreciate your time today as well.
Brian, thank you very much. May the force be with you.
Thank you.